All right, man. So we got some absolutely huge news here for the Kamala Harris campaign. Some really big news coming out from some legal news. So I did previously report on how Kamala Harris is actually already gearing up for a legal battle for the election results after. Trump is basically already saying that he's going to deny the election results regardless of what ends up happening. If he ends up losing, I think he even said that he would have won. He would win California if Jesus was the vote counter. So he's very clear that he's obviously going to try to steal the election again, just like he did last time. But Kamala Harris, as generally her campaign has been operating, is actually operating in a proactive manner as opposed to a reactive manner. So she's preparing prior to that as opposed to reacting, right? So the reports are currently saying that she's already amassed a legal team about 10 times the size. So Pennsylvania appears to be kind of the main battleground state, although because of the emergence of the Sun Belt, it's actually neutered sort of the impact of Pennsylvania potentially, especially with the in-play of North Carolina. But you do have to win either Pennsylvania, Georgia, or North Carolina to be able to win. So you have to win one of the three. So Pennsylvania is a huge one. I think if you win Pennsylvania, you probably can't lose the election. But here's the story. So it says, court stops Pennsylvania counties from throwing out mail-in votes over incorrect envelope dates. A state court is halting enforcement of a requirement that voters include accurate handwritten dates on envelopes used to submit mail-in ballots. A state court Friday halted enforcement of a requirement that voters include accurate handwritten dates on envelopes used to submit mail-in ballots, a ruling likely to keep several thousand Pennsylvania votes from being thrown out in the November election. In a decision handed down as the state is being hotly contested in the presidential contest, Commonwealth Court ruled 4-1 that disqualifying voters who failed to include the date violates the state's Constitution clause that addresses, quote, free and equal elections. The refusal to count undated or incorrectly dated but timely mail ballots submitted by otherwise eligible voters because of meaningless and inconsequential paperwork errors violates the fundamental right to vote in the Pennsylvania Constitution, wrote Judge Ellen Seisler in the majority opinion, siding with the left-leaning groups that sued 3 months ago. It says the number of mail-in ballots that might otherwise be disqualified for lacking accurate exterior envelope dates is comparatively small in a state where more than 6 million votes will be cast this fall, perhaps exceeding 10,000. So even this, if these 10,000 were to be thrown out, these could be deciding votes, especially because if they're on net votes. Like if you guys remember back in 2020, I remember, trying to explain to people even after it looked like the red mirage was happening on the night of election, right? And it looks like 98% of the votes are in, 99% of the votes are in. But such a massive margin of those 1% outstanding votes were actually blue. So, this is something that could be like a plus 9,000 margin. The election could come down to the wire. So this potentially could be the shifter, especially if it's like, heavily in the Democrats' favor. If it goes heavily margin in favor of Democrats, this could legitimately decide the election. So it's absolutely massive news, even if it's like a small number in terms of the overall numbers, right? It says, evidence in litigation surrounding the requirement has indicated older voters have been more likely to have their ballots thrown out for lack of an accurate handwritten date. Far more Democrats and Republicans vote by mail in Pennsylvania. So we can see it's saying Democrats more, so I don't know if it's going to be Democratic older voters that might have their votes thrown out, but it's saying far more Democrats and Republicans vote by mail in Pennsylvania. So it's also obviously a large deal because, again, there's going to be a larger margin Democrats. There's going to be a lot less mail-in ballot votes just because it's not COVID anymore, so more people are just going to go in person. But nonetheless, we know that far more Democrats and Republicans are voting by mail in Pennsylvania. And then we have the dissenter, Judge Patricia McCullough is saying showed a wholesale abandonment of common sense and ignoring precedent. She says, I must wonder whether walking into a polling place, signing your name, licking an envelope, or going to the mailbox can now withstand the majority's newly minted standard. So I don't know what she's going off on about. But so it says Democratic Governor Josh Shapiro posted on social media that the ruling was, quote, a victory for Pennsylvanians' fundamental right to vote. A lot of progressives are actually criticizing the governor, Josh Shapiro, right now because, he's apparently a little bit AWOL for the campaign, not really helping out much. Is he kind of salty about what's happening, about him not getting picked in those walls instead of him? It says the case was brought against Secretary of State and the election boards in Philadelphia and Allegheny County, which includes Pittsburgh. State and national Democratic Party groups joined the lawsuit supporting its goals. Multiple court cases have now confirmed that the dating of a mail-in ballot envelope when election officials can already confirm it was sent and received within the legal voting window provides no purpose to election administration, the Department of State said in a release. So they're going to appeal it, so we're going to have to hope that it's going to be able to survive the appeals, but it's good that we have this victory at least here. They argue the county election officials are able to tell whether ballots were cast in time because they are scanned and time-stamped upon approval. The ACLU of Pennsylvania, which helped represent the plaintiffs, hailed the decision as a win for voters and democracy. Quote, "No one should lose their vote over a simple human error. There's no relevance to whether or not the ballot was received on time," said Mike Lee, the group's executive director, in an emailed statement. I don't know why Mike Lee just sounds like really like Republican for some reason, but he's not. But this is huge, huge news. Again, this story going back says Kamala Harris hires a massive legal team to fight back against election denials. The number of lawyers on her staff is huge in comparison to what we saw with President Biden in 2020. The Harris for President campaign is staffing up with hundreds of lawyers as the campaign expects to have to battle Republicans on multiple fronts during and after the election this year. According to a New York Times report, the campaign now has a legal team of hundreds of staff attorneys and thousands of volunteer attorneys to combat expected challenges from Republicans this election cycle, including possibly the results of the 2024 election. One of the attorneys the campaign added is Mark Elias, who will be joining the team to specifically focus on possible recount efforts. This news comes after there are rumblings that Republicans will seek to have a repeat of 2020, where Donald Trump and his supporters spread election misinformation in an effort to undermine President Biden's win. So we can see that it's likely, almost guaranteed, that he's going to try to steal the election again. So the best thing here that we have is being prepared, having a legal team ready, etc. Kamala has clearly proven that she's sort of more of a proactive person. She's been reaching out to House surrogates almost immediately after she was chosen to be the nominee. Obviously, she couldn't do that prior to her becoming the nominee, or before Biden had dropped out of not becoming the nominee. But also, she was actually ready for this whole situation in terms of becoming the nominee for 2028, but it was triggered prior. So we know that the establishment and Nancy Pelosi, their plan was actually not to pick Kamala Harris, and what ended up happening, AOC came out and warned us, and it ends up she actually was right, according to that clip from Nancy Pelosi herself on The New Yorker. We also, know these different kinds of things about what's going on with Kamala Harris being proactive as opposed to reactive, and so the time frame got pulled up forward. What we can see here is Pennsylvania is absolutely dead heat as well. So it says new general election poll, Pennsylvania, Trump and Harris 49%. Wick is a B-rated pollster, 1607 likely voters dated 829. Wick may or may not be like somewhat right-leaning. There appears to right now be some kind of surge going on in terms of a bunch of like shady or right-wing pollsters coming out. But nonetheless, it looks like Pennsylvania is just absolutely dead heat. So we can see here with these poll numbers here in Pennsylvania, it says who's ahead in Pennsylvania, and you have this 1.2 margin. You can see this 1.2 margin is dropping for 1.8, and she's been stuck. So she's in a mud hut, basically, or a mud, not a mud hut, but like a mud puddle. So it's down to 1.2. She was actually at 1.6 on the 12th, which is damn near a month ago at this point. So almost a month ago, she's actually higher. So she's reached a sort of standstill in the aggregate. But Trafalgar is bringing the numbers down with the +2. Obviously, Trafalgar being sort of an obvious Republican pollster. So I think when we're looking at the aggregates, we do have to be able to look at the exact polls and look at these numbers and see what's going on in terms of what are they saying and what the margins are. Wick has even and +1. So again, these 10,000 ballots that could have been soiled, they can, decide the election. We can see that it's clearly dead heat. So it could potentially happen where, they both get 49s, and that's what it ends up coming down to on some like Georgia type ish, right? Where it gets that close. You never know. And this is one of the absolute, battleground states, right? +1, even. Redfield and Emerson. So this is like dead heat in a lot of these polls. Even, +1. And these evens 49s. It could come down to the wire. And so I think Kamala Harris needs to make sure she's continuing to fight these legal battles right now, and then obviously being prepared for what happens later, what comes later. Absolutely massive, right? So huge news coming out of the courts right now. The court ruling that they can't just throw out these mail-in ballots because, they had, incorrect envelope dates. As long as they were confirmed to have been sent at the correct time, that's all that matters. They'll be counted regardless of this, irrelevant sort of, useless just error that they're trying to use to try to throw them out. So really, really good news for the Kamala Harris campaign.